Is the audio going?
There we go.
Are we being live streamed? Are we recording?
I believe so. We are.
All right.
Take it away,
Okay,
Sluggo.
Steve, we're all systems go. Hey, everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman, back with the Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition call. This is number 131. We have a very, very packed agenda today, including a discussion of probably the single most important thing that has happened in the 21st century so far. If anybody wants to guess at it, I'm going to come back to it, and you can see if you got it. But I am not kidding. What happened within the past 10 days is, as far as I'm concerned, the game changer for the 21st century. We have, unfortunately, today a mass shooting in Nashville. It is the first one in recent memory that has been done by a woman, according to the news. She had two semi-automatic weapons there and killed at least 3 children, at least 3 teachers to the Christian school in Nashville. Another horrible event. Thank God that we don't have gun control, right? We have Brent Tannehill going to talk to us briefly about the disenfranchisement of trans people. We have an interesting story about the National Hockey League and gay rights, something we wouldn't expect. Then we're going to go into the number one issue this week, which is the Wisconsin Supreme Court race, which is heated up, and in many cases we're hearing a lot of very interesting things about it. We also, I don't know, is Judith Whitmer with us yet? We're going to talk about the disenthronement, I guess, the defenestration. Anybody wants to tell me what defenestration is of the progressive leadership of the Nevada Democratic Party? We're going to get into censorship nationwide, which is really running full speed ahead, and in a very, very bad way, a very dangerous way. And we're also going to talk about the radioactive leak at the Monticello nuclear plant in Minnesota. And I will say, I have been to Monticello in Virginia, Thomas Jefferson's ancestral home, and it is Monticello. That Monticello means small hill, but they're having a radioactive leak there, and it is not cool and something we really need to deal with. So welcome, Dennis Bernstein, the host of the Flashpoint show, nationally syndicated KPFA. Glad to have you with us, Dennis, and thank you for having me on last Friday. Let's start now. In the second hour, we also have a group. Wendy, what is the name of the group that's going to be joining us in the second hour?
Living Earth Movement.
The Living Earth Movement. Right.
I'll drop a link.
They will be talking about their environmental work. So as always, we have a ton. Let's start at the top now. Has anybody want to guess what is the most important thing that has happened so far in the 21st century that happened within the last 10 days and which is going to change everything in world history? Anybody want to guess at that? Tatanka, you might have an idea. Okay, it's the meeting of the prime minister or the leader of China with the leader of Russia in Moscow. This is earth-shaking in every way, shape, or form. You might want to think to yourself, after a century or more of American domination of world politics, in 2023, which is more powerful? The alliance of the United States and Canada, or the alliance of China, Russia, India, Iran, and many countries in Africa? Which is more powerful? The bottom line is that the joint meeting of the leaders of China and Russia, which has not happened in this kind of mode before, and is happening in the middle of the war in Ukraine, which is just fraught with all sorts of complications that we don't need to discuss right now. But the bottom line is that Russia and China, since since they had two kindred leaders, which was many, many years ago, which is Stalin and Mao. Stalin and Mao got along very well. But Stalin and, or rather, after Stalin died, Mao thought Khrushchev was a clown and had no respect for Russia. And for all these years, China, which has, of course, been growing by leaps and bounds in all ways, shape, and form, is now reaching out to Russia in a way that really ordains that this will not be a second American century. If you put China, India, Russia, Iran, and the other major countries of Eurasia and add them in with Africa, you can tell very, very clearly that the United States is headed for a second-rate power. And the population of China is about 1.5 billion. The population of India actually has exceeded now the population of China. And Russia is not that big in population, but obviously geographically it's gargantuan. The guy to read about this is Alfred McCoy, and I'd like to have him on sometime. Alfred McCoy is a professor of history at the University of Wisconsin, following the great footsteps of William Appleman Williams, who wrote The Contours of American History and The Tragedy of American Diplomacy, and was really one of the great scholars of our time. Alfred McCoy wrote a book in the 1960s that changed everything in terms of our perceptions of the war in Vietnam. It was called The Politics of Heroin in Southeast Asia. And Alfred McCoy laid out how the drug trade was shaping the Vietnam War. It was an incredibly important book, really opened people's eyes. And he is now writing about what they call the pivot, which is the peace in between Europe, Asia, and Africa, which will define who dominates the world going forward. And while we, the United States, has been fighting imperial war after imperial war, 10 years in Vietnam, 20 years in Afghanistan and Iraq, and completely draining our treasury, letting our infrastructure go to pot, as it were, and doing all the things that empires do in their decline. The Chinese have spent a fraction of what we've been spending on the military, and have had what's called a Belt and Road project, where they are basically building the infrastructure that will link Europe and Asia and Africa. And this is why this moment, especially happening in the middle of the war in Ukraine, is so absolutely critical to the future of the world. So I just want to put that out there. It is not generally in our wheelhouse in terms of what we discuss, but it is something of huge importance to all of us going forward for the next 50 or 100 years, because this represents the rise to power of China. The other thing, and the very important thing that people need to understand that they did agree on, is that China and Russia and probably India will join in, which is about half the population of the world. They are going to get off the dollar. The dollar has been the defining currency of world trade for the last 100 years. And literally since the 1890s, 1900s, when the US started to become a dominant power and the dollar was used for global trade, that's going to change. And it's the Chinese yuan, 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 that is now going to dominate. And I will say that those of you who are looking for an explanation for the war in Iraq and for the destruction of Gaddafi in Libya, much of it was about currency, because Saddam, who had all the resources he needed, and Gaddafi both wanted to leave the petrodollar. Saddam was talking about trading his oil in euros, and they killed him for it, basically. And then Gaddafi had about 130 tons of gold, just in his basement somewhere, 130 tons of gold. And he was going to launch a new African currency, the dinar. And if there's one thing that gives a country dominance in the world, it's having the dominant currency. And the United States, after this meeting between the Chinese and the Russians, that's over, people. And we're going to have to start really seriously reevaluating. We had an American century, which we squandered in the killing fields of Southeast Asia and Southwest Asia and the Middle East. And this is a tipping point. And it happened last week around the vernal equinox in 2023. So you may want to remember this as the United States rides off into the Asian sunset. Tatanka, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll just add that it was not just Iran and Iraq, it was North Korea, and they were all three demonized right after that. The event that you're talking about, Harvey, is a tipping point. It has been out in the open. It's been in play for decades and decades. And I mean, I learned, some people I've told the story here, I learned from somebody who was working at Stanford Research Institute almost 50 years ago, who was telling me that sometime around 2020, the United States will be at war with whoever the president of Russia is. And the whole goal was to isolate China, right? And after Russia had spun off its ethnic provinces to kind of push it into the European sphere. And so, I mean, if I knew that, I'm sure everybody's intelligence in the world knew it. And we've been watching this build slowly for decades and decades, what's now coming together as you describe it. So it's not a surprise. I doubt that it's a surprise for the CIA, but who knows? I mean, did they really, think that supporting Chiang Kai-shek and Mao was just a nobody? I mean, we could be repeating that part of history too.
Yes. So at any rate, we're going to leave that behind, and you're 100% right, Tatanka. This is I've been watching for the last week. My daughter is laid up with a bum leg, and we watched, and I highly recommend this for your educational, your understanding of what's happened to this country's economy, which really took the big dive, the big short, as it were, in 2008. We watched, first of all, we watched a 4-part series on Bernie Madoff, which is astounding that he could have done what he did. And then we watched a movie called The Big Short, which is an absolute masterpiece. I've actually seen it 5 times. You really need to watch this movie to understand what is happening to the American economy. The Big Short, Steve Carell is in it, Christian Bale. It's extremely well done. And he made off with everyone's retirement. And Bernie Madoff was just a sociopath. It's hard to believe he did what he did. And followed by a movie called Margin Call with Kevin Spacey. And then at the end, we watched sort of a docudrama. It wasn't very good, actually, in terms of quality, but it told the story of how Shearson Lehman went down the tubes. And these cinematic pieces really explained as a whole where the economy went in 2008. And Obama had the chance to come in and really restructure the banking system and move some resources to the people who had lost their homes and their jobs and their cars and their health insurance. And well, he did provide health insurance in part. And really a lot was explained in these movies that no one went to jail except one guy. They found one guy, an obscure number cruncher, to send to jail for the trillions of dollars that were lost in the 2008 crash. And really, if you have to see one movie to understand where we're at economically in this country, it would be The Big Short. And I strongly recommend it. We will not have a quiz next week but please, everybody, pay attention, and pay attention now to what's happening in Ukraine and the maneuvering between the Chinese and the Russians, and very important to watch where India, Iran, Brazil, and other countries come down, big countries with big economic stakes in the global economy come down on this, because this is a turning point in American power, and it cannot be overstated. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for letting me go on about that. We want to get to the first item on the agenda, which is the most important race going on in the country now, and then Brim will get to you on LGBTQ issues and trans issues, and Florida with Wendy Lieberman also. I want to talk about the Wisconsin race. It is coming on April 4th, a week from tomorrow, actually, is that correct? And I have been finally starting to get some email solicitations, and maybe some of you have, from the Democrats about this race. I've been getting solicitations from, as I mentioned last week, and I'm sure you are too, from candidates who are running next fall in Wisconsin. It's outrageous. And we have this incredibly important race going on right now in Wisconsin. The Wisconsin Supreme Court was 4-3 for a dozen years, dominated by extreme right wingers who put in, gerrymandering on the brink of banning abortion. And this is my piece on Counterpunch. Thank you, Steve, for putting it up there, and thank you, Counterpunch, for running it. This is the Wisconsin Supreme Court here. People generally don't pay attention to state Supreme Court races, but this one could actually decide the presidential election next year, because voting rights are absolutely at issue in front of this court. And if they prevent people of color again from voting in Wisconsin, Wisconsin went for Trump in 2016 and then for Biden in 2020 only because of grassroots organizing. Then we lost the Senate seat. The Democrats lost the Senate seat in 22. Mandela Barnes, a progressive African-American candidate, should never have lost to this horrific MAGA guy, Ron Johnson. But the Republicans bragged, and it's in my article. There's a direct quote, and we are an election protection focus here, a direct quote from a Republican operative in Milwaukee bragging about the thousands of people that he personally prevented from voting in Wisconsin. And that decided this critical US Senate race in Wisconsin, with this horrible MAGA Republican defeating this good progressive candidate. Should never have happened. And simultaneously, the Democratic governor was reelected. So this, as we've talked about previously, this a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin is extremely important. The most important race of the year, could actually decide the presidential race next year. We are emphasizing the get out to vote aspect of this. The Center for Common Ground, which is centerforcommonground.org. If you go on that website, you're confronted with a screen, and they tell you how and to make direct calls into the state. And I did that in Georgia 2022. It was actually very interesting, a lot of fun. People need to do it in the next week because people who have been canvassing there say that very, very few people know that this race is even happening. I mean, who pays attention to Supreme Court, state Supreme Court races? So the big important thing is to raise awareness. There are people who are going to be driving voters to the polls in Wisconsin, and that could make all the difference. It's expected to be a very close race. The woman who's running on the liberal side, it's officially a nonpartisan race, is called Judge Judy. I can't pronounce her last name. I keep wanting to call her Antetokounmpo, but she does not play center for the Milwaukee Bucks. So, I urge everyone, go to centerforcommonground.org and make the phone calls. If you can't do that, there's a group in Wisconsin called Souls to the Polls. We had them on their website is soulstothepollswi.org. Steve, if you can, I think you can put that in the chat maybe. That's helpful as well. Does anyone want to say anything about this Supreme Court race in Wisconsin? Ruth Strauss, please. Ruth, unmute you here. I actually got.
Harvey, it's Judge Janet, not Judge Judy.
Oh, Judge Janet, yes. And does anyone want to say
her last name, I think maybe Polish or something like that. It's Proskowitz or something like that.
Yes,
it's a long Polish name. So thank you. And yes, Common Ground will make it very easy for you to do phone banking, and they have webinars to do it. And the other thing I wanted to add real quickly, Harvey, is there's also a movie that's hysterically funny, but extremely informative. And the Academy finally did something good. They gave it the Academy Award in 2010. It's called Inside Job. And it explains all that crazy stuff about credit default swaps and not only Lehman Brothers, but all the other banks that went down. So it's and started in Iceland. Anyway, it's very good also. But thanks for your movie reviews.
Yes, well, that one, and there's also one about Enron called Smartest Guys in the Room.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I got to say, anybody on this call, if you have not seen The Big Short, you need to see The Big Short. It is the best movie I've ever seen about Wall Street, and what happened, certainly about what happened in 2008. Extremely complicated stuff made very easy and actually enjoyable to understand. Dennis Bernstein and then Lynn. Dennis from KPFA, glad to have you on board.
Thank
Unmuted.
I'm here. Let's see.
Yes, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay. So I just wanted to that you left this like a cliffhanger. You were talking about the banks in the beginning, and you sort of got to the point where why didn't Obama do anything about it? Because he didn't do anything about it because the person who got him elected, Penny Pritzker, was a banking criminal from a family of criminals that go way back, offshore bank. Pritzker was Obama's finance chairwoman. And Pritzker, actually, just before she took that job, crashed a bank in Chicago, Superior Bank. She crashed it. It cost taxpayers almost $1 billion, and 1,400 people with savings accounts lost their money. Then she took a job working for Obama, and everybody wondered, how could Obama raise more than Clinton? How could he outdo the Clintons? Paul Penny Pritzker, who had, the banking bandits for decades. You want to know all about offshore storage of money and illegal operations? See the Pritzkers. Whatever is terrible about banking, the Pritzkers did it first and set the tone. That's why Barack Obama got elected president. I don't know. Right. Am I going on here? You get it though? This is everybody wondered what's going to happen. Here comes Penny. Don't worry, everything's safe. And all the go-go banking, she was in the middle of it. The Pritzkers set the tone, and it's unbelievable. It was never a story. Never a
Dennis,
story. Yeah.
Dennis, it sounds like she's penny wise and dollar foolish.
Yeah.
So is anybody who works with her.
Shut up. Exactly.
She's also very pro-nuclear, by the way. That family has supported the so-called nuclear renaissance with a ton of money. They're behind the Breakthrough Institute and that guy Scheisskopf, whatever his name is, who runs around.
I don't think that's his real name, but that might be a good
epithet
for
Dennis,
him.
Thank you for that. If you want to see how a bank jumped out from under what you're describing, see Margin Call with Kevin Spacey. That shows you how a bank who knew they were just had garbage assets, dumped all their assets just ahead of the tsunami that wiped everybody out. We got 50 people with us. Lynn Heide, thank you, Dennis. Lynn Heidekopper.
One thing, Penny Pritzker was, I think she was CEO of Hyatt Hotels, wasn't she? And she is anti-labor, so I would demonstrate it outside a Hyatt hotel where she denied them unionization. She finally caved in, but only like the Boston Hyatt. Not every Hyatt was able to have labor. Anyway, the reason I'm calling is I put in the chat, I mistakenly put Judge Judy. Watched too much TV.
That's why I got it.
Too much TV. Protasewicz. I've been phone banking for her, and actually it looks pretty good. I've gotten a lot of people are going to vote for her.
Yes, they say the polls show her ahead. She's running against a total abomination. Another Ron Johnson MAGA guy. This guy's name, I believe, is Kelly. He was on the Supreme Court before. He's anti-choice, anti-democracy, the whole deal. And if the liberals get a hold, Dan Kelly, thank you, Carl. If the liberals get a hold of the Supreme Court, we may reverse gerrymandering. I mean, the numbers in the Wisconsin legislature are nauseating. Wisconsin is pretty well 50-50, maybe slightly more Democratic, and the Republicans have super majorities in both houses of the Wisconsin legislature, only because of gerrymandering. It's unreal. So please do pay attention to this. We have 1 week to go on this. I got an email today from Cory Booker. This is the first Democratic Party email I've gotten supporting the Supreme Court race. And Cory Booker, there is. I'm reading the name. I still don't dare pronounce it. Protasewicz. Maybe that's it. Protasewicz. If you can say Antetokounmpo, you can say Protasewicz. The email I got from Cory Booker asks to split the money. I've never seen this. He says back the Supreme Court race, and by the way, give me half the money that you're match the grant you're gonna give her with money from me. It's outrageous. Anyway, Jeffrey, very quickly, and this will be your one question for the time, and then we'll go forward. Jeffrey Barker, really quickly, please. One thing.
I wanted to comment on what Dennis Bernstein said.
Very good. Go ahead. What is it? Yes.
Did you know how FDR got elected? It was through the corporates.
Okay.
That's a little bit off topic, but thanks, Jeffrey.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Okay,
but we are going to look at how people get elected and unelected, and how dark money and corporate money has been swamping primaries and even Democratic Party elections now in the states. And Sluggo, I just wanted to let you know Judith Whitmer is here.
Judith is here, and Bryn, I hope you can stay with us. We're going to talk about the Nevada Democratic Party unseating the progressives, and then we're going to go to Florida with the LGBTQ issues. Bryn, you'll be part of that discussion, and also the laundry list of what Ron DeSantis has in store for us. And I have a marketing idea. I think we should start marketing T-shirts, pink T-shirts with a triangle for Florida, and we can talk about that in a bit. Judith Whitmer, you've been on with us before. Whitmer, you've been on with us before. When you were on with us before, you were head of the Democratic Party of Nevada, and I understand that is no longer true. Can you tell us what happened in Nevada with you and the Democratic Party, please?
Sure, thanks. And thank you for having me on today. Basically, my stand against dark money in Democratic primaries made me a target for establishment for corporatist Dems as well. I introduced that resolution twice to the DNC. The first time they refused to take a vote, and the second time they refused to, nobody stepped forward to actually present a motion to take a vote. So effectively it was blocked twice by the DNC resolutions committee. And it's part of the whole system as far as the corruption goes, and as far as how toxic the political system has become at the DNC. where, you know, it's stacked, the membership is stacked with lobbyists and corporate consultants that basically run all of these committees and decide what gets through and what doesn't get through. But regardless of that, we had a successful election here in Nevada. 2022 was a good year for Nevadans. We reelected Senator Cortez Masto. We effectively held the Senate for U.S. Congress. We held the Senate. And we elected a majority of our state legislature. So we had a really good election, really good year, and the Democratic Party was extremely successful. Our administration did a lot of new things, a lot of great things, including reelecting all those people. And we had a great fundraising year. We had to do all of our own fundraising because the DNC, the DS, and the D-TRIP gave all of the funding to our competing organization, which was Nevada Democratic Victory, which, as some of you may recall, was a shadow organization that set up shop shortly after my election as the chair of the Democratic Party of Nevada. They set up shop as a separate organization to run the coordinated campaign for Senator Cortez Masto. But it was still up to our Democratic Party to elect all of our Democrats up and down the ballot. And we did a great job of that. We had successful turnout. We increased rural turnout. We worked with our rural county parties in coalition to turn out the vote across Nevada, not just in Clark and Washoe counties, but across the state of Nevada, which has been unheard of in previous years. So we implemented a lot of new outreach programs. We implemented a lot of support for our down ballot races because, as most of you know, extremist agendas start at the down ballot level. They start in, you know, in state legislative houses. They start in judicial seats and state offices, and they bubble up from there to the Supreme Court. So we felt that it was our responsibility to take a hard look at how we could help down ballot races as well. And we did that successfully. We had some really significant wins in our judicial races, as well as our state legislative races, and numerous other races like school board races that are also important in our communities, because those down ballot races have an enormous impact on our daily lives. So we took those things very seriously. We enacted programs, outreach programs, down ballot campaigns. We enacted legislative initiatives. We did legislative roundtables to involve the community and keep them participating in non-election years. And we had a lot of great successes. Unfortunately, that's not really what the Democratic Party wants. And that, I mean, they may say so. Chair Harrison over and over again would lecture us during DNC meetings about how important down ballot races are. But when the reality, the reality is that they really do not care about state races or down ballot races. They want to hoard all the money and control all of the races at the top levels. And it's really all about the top of the ticket. And also in the past, one of the things that we had promised was that we would level the playing field for progressive candidates and for candidates of color and for our rural down ballot candidates. And we did that successfully as well. And that's another thing that the corporatists did not like and the consulting class did not like, because it made it impossible for them to control those elections. Just like you're seeing as far as dark money and in these primary races where the candidate that should win isn't winning because of all this dark money. This is what it's about. It's about control. They want the candidates that support the status quo and that support the consulting class to win. And so when it came time for the state party elections, they actually used a PAC against us. This is how absurd it is, because my office is volunteer. Like the Democratic State Party Chair of Nevada is a volunteer office. I did not get paid for all the work that I did and all the energy and time and effort I put into that job and all the travel I put into it. It ultimately is not what they are looking for. It's not what they want. They don't want to expand the Democratic Party. They don't want everyone to have the chance to participate. They do not want everyone's voice to be heard. It's only the people they want to hear from that they want to be part of the process. It's only the people that will fall in line and take orders and not ask questions that they want to be part of the process. And they want to control every single election, even at the primary level, because they don't want progressives to win office. They absolutely do not want progressives to be represented at the upper levels. And they want to control all the money. And by taking over the state party again, that gives them the opportunity to funnel millions in dark money through the state party to these consultants and to the campaigns of the top of the ticket. So regardless of the fact that they had tons of money, we didn't interfere with any of that. They were still able to run their coordinated campaigns separate from the state party. They were still able to get all the funding and everything else. And despite the fact that we reelected Senator Cortez Masto and reelected our entire state legislature, they still decided that we were too much of an obstruction for what they ultimately saw as their goal, which was to absolutely control every single facet of the state party, all the money. And, by doing that, then the same consultants have control, the same consultants add to their funds. The same consultants make millions and millions of dollars off of every campaign. And nobody from the community or from grassroots organizing is going to have an opportunity to win these races as long as they have that kind of control, because they have unlimited dark money. They have no remorse in using that dark money against primary candidates in the Democratic primary. So it's one of those battles that we're going to have to keep fighting. The fact that they used the Sapphire PAC to run a campaign against me and my slate should tell you all that you need to know. That Sapphire PAC takes donations from Pfizer, from Southwest Gas, from Nevada Energy. And that same Sapphire PAC was established by my opponent, Assemblywoman Danielle Monroe Marino. And that PAC also donated to all of the state legislators there in the Nevada state legislature. So, they're maintaining absolute control by putting one of their own again at the top. And the consultants have regained control of the state party, and all the work that we did to build a permanent infrastructure to run effective down ballot statewide campaigns, our outreach programs, all of that has already been demolished, dismantled. They dismantled our whole infrastructure. We had a successful year-round operating infrastructure with permanent staff. They laid off our entire unionized staff because they're trying to avoid having unionized staff. They don't want to pay union dues or union wages. So they've effectively completely demolished everything that we built over the past 2 years, and that is absolutely just for the goal and enrichment of our consultants.
Judith, our sympathies are with you. This must be really hard for you. We loved having you back before, and we know I read something similar. I don't know if there's anybody on from New York, but I think a similar purge went on in New York, and of course the New York Democratic Party completely blew control of Congress this time, and and this is what's going on in Wisconsin as well. There was a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin a few years ago where the Democrats just, blew the whole thing off. And so I fear for the future when the real people are purged from the party. It's a nightmare. So we're with you, and what you've just said is incredibly important, and it's at the root. This is why we're a nonpartisan group. This is at the root of the kind of campaigning we push, and one of the great gurus in this is John Steiner. John, did you want to speak to this? And also, I just want to take this moment to point out later this evening, there's a major Zoom with Our Revolution. They're going to be talking about issues like this. And John, you also have another Zoom coming up. You may want to tell people about that as well. So John Steiner, please.
Judith, I just wanted to add kind of real commiseration and sadness, much less anger and rage, to what you've just shared with us, which we know is going on all over the country, and the Democrat Party challenging any progressive running in a primary at the same time. So my question is, what do you do next? Other than kind of spreading the word and speaking truth to power?
Well, I will continue speaking truth to power, but I also am looking at several other options. continuing to do grassroots organizing as always. And we'll continue to fight the dark money, especially in our Democratic primaries. I mean, that's some place where we should really take a stand, because the Democratic Party platform even calls for that, but they refuse to actually pass anything to enact it or enforce it or have consequences for any of those who don't abide by those rules. So it's really just paying lip service. And I think that the Democrats have got to prove that we're willing to do more than lip service. And that's why nonpartisan numbers are growing. I mean, we're seeing tremendous growth in nonpartisan registration, but yet the Democratic Party keeps looking the other way, like, oh, you know, they're just a bunch of extremists, they don't count. They're still trying to play to that moderate Republican that doesn't really exist anymore. But I think that they're going to have a rude awakening coming in the next coming years as more and more nonpartisans realize that they do have power, and they start to vote as blocks, and they start to organize among themselves the way, you know, grassroots organizers have. I think that we'll start to see some more of that too, because just because you're nonpartisan doesn't mean you're not interested in who's running for office, or that you don't have somebody that you would like to see run for office, or that you would support if they were running for office. So there's a lot of energy out there yet to harness.
And Judith, are you connecting with other folks like you who have been similarly exiled, as it were? Harvey mentions New York. We know part of what's going on in Florida. Is there an emerging national network of those of you who have been leaders on the progressive side to kind of amplify your efforts and make them better known?
Yes, there is that conversation going on. There is that communication, and we're going to be expanding on that in the next coming weeks. There are definitely there's a lot of opportunity there.
Keep us
There
posted.
needs to be a
Thanks.
national. Go ahead, John.
Keep us posted. Thank you.
Thank
John,
you.
what is your Zoom coming up later in the week? You have a Zoom call that you.
We can pass on that one now. It's
Okay, so I
it's-
think there needs to be of course, a national organization of people like you who have run state parties. We had these issues, especially, as I mentioned, 3 U.S. Senate seats definitely turned on the Democrats' unwillingness to do grassroots organizing, which was in Ohio, where they could have won if with a relatively progressive candidate, pro-nuclear. But what can I tell you? In North Carolina, where Beasley should have won, absolutely, and in Wisconsin, where Mandela Barnes should have won, absolutely, losing by I think 30,000 votes. Thankfully, you were in place, and you weren't expected. The Senate was not expected to be held, and that seat was held, and probably because of your efforts. And then, of course, they got rid of you. So here we are. This is endemic. It's also in Florida, of course, where they've just put in basically, you know, sometimes I think that the Democratic Party is actually being run by Steve Bannon. And, you know, that they do what they really need to do to lose. And we're seeing that all over the place. Myla Reeson, you had the firsthand pick, Myla.
Thank you. And let's not forget about what happened to Nina Turner in Ohio.
Yes, exactly,
Similar kind
right.
of thing. Judith, I am wondering whether you have a website or an organization or someplace where people can learn about what happened in Nevada and offer some kind of monetary support or help you get the word out. Do you have a website?
We are actually working on that. And I will have something soon that I can share with everybody.
Well, I think you might consider working with John, because John's in kind of contact with other groups around the country, and to set up exactly such a website, you know, Democrats, progressive Democrats in exile or something like that. And this is what we transcended in Georgia in 2020 and 22. If the progressives through and the grassroots campaigners through the Center for Common Ground and the Atlanta and now Georgia NAACP had not gotten around the Democratic Party, those 2 seats definitely would not have been won. And that's where we're looking at the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin. And I think that's why I was actually shocked to get this email from Cory Booker, the very mainstream senator from New Jersey, offering to share a donation with the Supreme Court candidate in Wisconsin. To me, this is the mainstream piggybacking on the grassroots, and that phenomenon I'm sure you are very, very well aware of. So this should be written up. There should be a website about this going into 24. That's what we're about, and we hope you'll stick with us and join us in the future as we move ahead here. Okay, we have
Sluggo, I have a quick question for Judith as well. Judith, you've advocated for an energized grassroots approach to state Democratic Party leadership, and you proved that such an approach is far more successful than other approaches which have failed catastrophically in other states like Florida and earlier in Virginia. What lessons can we learn and apply based on these totally different types of organizing? Your way of doing it, and also, as Sluggo referenced, the Georgia way of using grassroots, year-round engagement versus mainly TV ads and, trying to get people to vote, a few weeks before the election. What lessons can we learn and apply?
Great question. I think the main lessons we can learn is that there's not one approach fits all. First of all, it's going to have to take a lot of strategic effort on the parts of grassroots organizations to look at these things individually to determine where we can make the best approach or how we can make the best approach. Because one state is not going to be the same as any other state. Not only the landscape going to look different, but the demographics are different across different states. The political system in place is different. I mean, the Florida Democratic Party looks a lot different than the Nevada Democratic Party. So we have to look at where we can approach those things and how we can approach those things. And it's going to take several different strategies going forward to have any success. I've had several conversations with Florida progressives. They're near and dear to my heart because I'm originally from the Florida area. So I grew up in Florida. So I think that we can't say one strategy fits all. We have to look at different strategies. I still feel strongly that there has to be inside and outside work done. It's not going to be all on the outside or all on the inside. We're going to have to be pulling and pushing at the same time to get any real measure of success. Progressives are in for a long battle. It's not going to be anything short term. And I think we also have to get better at looking at the long game, the big picture, and how some of these small steps fit into the big picture, because we always want to see immediate successes, immediate strategic results. But we have to see how that looks at the long game and what we're really working for in the long game. I mean, is our long game a progressive presidential candidate, a progressive successful presidential candidate? Do we want a real progressive in the White House? Is that our big strategy? Or is our big strategy going to be looking at the individual states and seeing where we can make those big wins within those states to set us up for a win in 2028? Because it's not going to be 2024. We have to look at our 2028 strategy going forward and how we're going to have all that infrastructure in place ahead of 2028. Because it really is going to take an absolute infrastructure, a progressive infrastructure across the nation to have that kind of success going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. This needs to be written up. It needs to be explained very clearly. This is our 131st call on basically just this topic. This is what we're about: protecting the vote and switching the progressive resources to the grassroots. And your experience is certainly exemplary of what can happen here when the mainstream Democrats come crashing down on the grassroots, as of course we learned in the two primaries that Bernie ran in. So this is critical. Very good. Thank you for that, Justin, Wendy, and Eric. Justin LeBlanc, please. And we're going to push through this. Usually we stop with the politics at and go to the environment at 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock Pacific. But I think we got enough. I hope, Bryn, you can stay with us. We got enough to power through here into Florida, where we have had a similar fight for control of the Democratic Party. And again, the progressives have gotten crushed, and we wound up now with the most terrifying politician I've seen in my entire lifetime, Ron DeSantis. So this is what happens when the mainstream Democrats get rid of the grassroots. Justin, please, then Wendy and Eric.
Sure. If any of you guys have worked for a corporate employer, you probably understand this corporate culture idea of the harder you work, the more they make you work. Judith, I think you're a prime example of that. In fact, you're in some ways a victim of your own success because the party sees that and wants to co-opt that rather than support that. And so it's clear that it's not just doing a good job. What's necessary here is also leverage against the party itself. And my favorite statement right now is the solution to tyranny is plurality. And what does that basically mean? That means instead of being in, like, say, waiting for 100 layers of bureaucracy to get to your specialist doctor, going to an association of doctors where you have 100 specialists right there in the room. So the idea of a multi-member district is the same kind of thing, where instead of having one representative, you have 5 representatives, like a city council. We should be extending that to statewide races, not just cities and counties. And that is something that the citizens can push themselves. We want more representation rather than less. And we're not just going to accept the one champion that you corporate office want to put out, because again, they're all about consolidating, monopolizing. We want distribution, kind of like we want distributed energy, right? Okay, so that's my soapbox. But thank you,
Justin,
very much for your
I want to pose this reality. The Democratic Party had a choice in 2016 between Bernie and Trump. And they definitely preferred Trump. I mean, the mainstream Democratic Party, when confronted with a serious progressive who could have won, preferred. Julie Weiner has joined us good because she'll have a report from the Democratic Party fiasco in New York as well. And the same thing in Wisconsin, when confronted with an African American progressive like Mandela Barnes, they chose Ron Johnson. And I fear what's going to happen in the race. You have Jackie Rosen, is that who it is? I think I met her actually, the senator, and she's going to have an uphill race, and she's not going to have a grassroots Democratic Party to run with, and that's very serious.
You have to realize that they don't think that they need one. Right. They're very arrogant about that, and the Democratic Party here, and I know everybody's familiar with the term the Reid machine. Well, Senator Harry Reid was an amazing person, but he's not running the machine. It's the consultants running the machine. He's, not only that he's no longer with us, he hasn't run the machine in a while. The machine's has been run by consultants. And those consultants pay out a lot of money to bring people into the state to run these campaigns. So there effectively isn't really any grassroots organizing or campaigning within the Democratic Party here anymore. It's all being done professionally. They're paying people from outside, bringing them in. They always talk about, they've got all this union support, but they really don't. What they do is they pay the culinary union on a national basis. They have a contract with the culinary union. The culinary union gives time off to their employees to come to Nevada, and they get double paid. They get paid for their job, and they get paid by the coordinated campaign to do canvassing and stuff. They always pretend that they're volunteers or they're grassroots organizers, and they're not. They're paid to do these jobs. So they have these kind of deep roots and these deep pockets with all this dark money to bring people in. They don't really care about grassroots organizing anymore. They haven't for a long time.
Right. They fear grassroots organizing.
Yes, they do.
As a matter of fact, they oppose grassroots organizing. So that's what we're about here at these group calls. I want to say, my listeners at Progressive Radio Network, prn.live, this is about the end of our hour. With this, obviously, this conversation is going to continue. You can hear that it's being recorded. You can hear the rest of it at grassrootsep.org or electionprotection2024.org. We are recording, and it is posted there online, the whole Megillah. So if you're signing off from PRN right now, on our Thursday hour, and you want to hear the rest of it, join us at electionprotection2024.org. Wendy, and then Eric. And Julie Weiner, I want to invite you, I welcome you. We're talking about how the Nevada Democratic Party purged its progressive leadership, and the same thing, I believe, has just happened in New York. Eric, Wendy, and then Eric.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us, Judith. Thanks for being back with us. We enjoyed having you both times. Just a couple of quick points. And so one, I think it's kind of amazing that what Hillary was busted for with Bernie, like undermining completely, is what's the common culture now. I'm here in Florida as well. I didn't know you were from here. That's great. I volunteered with the DNC. You had to volunteer through the DNC if you wanted to oversee or help with the curing and the recount in the DeSantis race when he ran against Gillum and Rick Scott was elected. And I watched the DNC like fumble it so poorly that, I mean, it was just, there was no recount, there was no curing. It was I lost all faith in it. What I wanted to say is we have a mutual friend in Carolina Impudia who just yeah, she wanted to be with us today. She's become kind of a regular, but we go back a few years. We're really good friends. I'm from Broward. So I guess it's like speaking for her, just maybe get in contact with her because, you know, what just happened, she just ran for the Dem chair after stepping down as the progressive head, and she does a phenomenal job, but she's been doing a lot of organizing, and it would be great to have us kind of, you know, like what John Steiner mentioned, but to get that, you know, to, like, because now, like in Florida, I'm seeing all the Democrats, like they're just getting behind Nikki Fried, who as well, like when she ran for governor, she attacked Charlie Crist more than she did DeSantis. Yeah. And people think that they can trust her. And we need to have a viable alternative, a strong foundation in something progressive, like you're saying with the nonpartisan or the independent voters. I think they care more than, I don't want to say more than, but possibly more than regular people, because they're the ones paying attention. Like they're independent because they actually care about the issues and aren't just going to play, you know, ego team in their side. So anyway, reach out to Carolina or and maybe we can all continue this fight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy. We're going to carry on with a discussion in Florida. Eric Lazarus, you're in New York, and Julie Weiner. I believe I read somewhere that after completely blowing the congressional elections in New York, the Democratic Party has proceeded to purge the progressives there. Maybe I'm wrong. Eric Lazarus, do you have a comment on that? You're also in New York.
Hey, I feel a little embarrassed. I feel like I should have a really good answer to this question myself, but I don't. Judy, under what circumstances would you recommend to people in a position like the one you were in to run a parallel progressive Democratic organization, club, whatever the right term is, and to do a lot of get out the vote, voter registration, funding and stuff in an organization that's harder for corporate Democrats to take over because it's the board of directors of it would be all progressive people. Does that make any sense? Under what circumstances would it? I'm Eric. Thanks so much.
Well, Eric, that makes absolute sense. It's funny that you mentioned that because that's one of the things that we've been talking about a lot here in Nevada is running like an umbrella campaign team, like an umbrella campaign team where we build our own infrastructure for our down ballot candidates that are progressive and run it in parallel to the Democratic Party because we know the Democratic Party will not support those candidates. And they're going to do everything they can to make sure that progressives or that even candidates that come from the grassroots that are coming organically from their communities that want to represent their communities, especially like the Black and Hispanic communities here or the AAPI communities here that want to really truly represent their communities, but they're not given that opportunity because they can't afford to pay the Democratic Party $100,000 for van access or you know access to the voter files. And what we did as a state party was we did away with that. We gave them in-kind van services for, you know, and just reported as an in-kind donation to their campaigns. We made sure that every single down ballot candidate had access to the tools and resources they needed. So we're going to have to continue that in some way or find a way to continue that work so that those candidates can be successful and have a platform to run on. And that's going to require that we build our own infrastructure. But the good news is that we have experience building that infrastructure now through the Democratic Party. We know what they're going to do, how they're going to obstruct us. We know everything we need to know about compliance reporting and all of those things that go into running those operations. So we can successfully run a parallel organization. And I think that we will be looking at that quite seriously.
So I think what you might consider, Judith, is to look at the book that was compiled on the Georgia Miracle and be in touch with Andrea and Ray McClendon. And maybe we can come up with a blended guidebook going forward for the 24 election, so that nobody is blindsided after all these years by the corporate Democrats, and we can get around them and elect some decent people and not wind up with Ron Johnson, for God's sakes, as the senator from Wisconsin. I mean, it just, I can barely, and this idiot from Ohio, J.D. Vance, there's no reason. You know, John and I talked to the people from Ryan's campaign and tried to get them to do grassroots organizing, and, you know, nothing. John, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing, Judith and Harvey. I don't know if you guys saw this, and I think he's an ally with us on this, but I'm not quite sure how, namely Michael Moore.
Yeah.
Michael did a 12-part short series over the Christmas holidays he called Blue Dots in a Red Sea. And he really called on his people to essentially do this parallel kind of organizing. And I don't know what's on his website, Harvey. I don't know if you can get him on, but he basically is saying much the same thing and giving ordinary citizens a toolbook on how to organize.
Yes, and Michigan is a case study. I mean, we flipped Michigan. I got to tell you, one of the people that helped us do it, this is why I love history, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was the governor of California and was a real opponent, serious opponent of gerrymandering, gave $3 million of his personal money to win 2 referenda in California. And although it's not perfect, the districting commission in California is the least gerrymanderable state in the country. And he was opposed by Pelosi and the mainstream Democrats, but he was a Republican. And he had an affair with his housekeeper. His housekeeper had a son, and the son went to the University of Michigan. And Arnold, he brought his father into Michigan, and that's one of the reasons why Michigan had such a progressive success with anti-gerrymandering. But the other thing that Michigan did, and we had her on, the campaigners from Michigan, they circulated a petition, got 750,000 signatures, and put a pro-abortion constitutional amendment on the ballot, and they swept the state. And was the Democratic Party involved? Hell no. But, you know, here we go. So I can't resist. Arnold Schwarzenegger just had the best quote I've heard about dying. He says, "I don't fear death, but I'm really pissed off about it." Okay, that's a perfect Arnold. Julie Weiner, I know you're in New York, Julie.
Yes.
Can you tell us anything about what's happening with the Democratic Party in New York? I read somewhere, perfect line for the internet age, that they purged the progressives. Am I right about that?
I don't know if I would describe what's going on that way.
Okay.
Sorry, my computer video isn't working. I'm going
You're
to turn
good.
off
You're
the
good.
video.
We can see you.
Yeah. Well, you can't really.
All right.
But anyway, I can't see you if I don't have the video. My
Right, well,
screen
we're fine
facing the
hearing your
ceiling.
voice. Go
Sorry.
ahead.
Yeah. Look, yes, Jay Jacobs is extremely conservative, and he damaged the United States Democratic Party by failing to deploy any serious street infrastructure. We almost lost the governorship, and the governor herself is extremely conservative. She's really a Cuomo Democrat. There's a big fight now between the progressives in the Senate and Assembly to fight back on budget, unconscionable, extremely unusual budget provisions, like trying to force locales to build housing without any funding for infrastructure through the budget instead of voting on the thing. But I have to say, there is a good progressive fight back to try and restructure the Democratic Party. It's going to take time. Former State Senator Biaggi is one of the people in the lead. I just heard a great talk at a local Indivisible chapter by New York Democratic State Committee member Ben Yee, really analyzing how we can fight back. So I would say there's it's a battle to rebuild the Democratic Party. It's been very destroyed by Cuomo and by Jay Jacobs. It's really been damaged. And there's a parallel thing going on in my town, which is Yonkers, where the mayor has defied the voters and extended his term limits twice and has put a lot of his people in. Yeah, Mayor for Life Mike Spano. It looks like we're getting, this is the second time he's pulled that. And he's putting a lot of his people into, or he has put a lot of his people into the Democratic Party. He's supporting not very well educated, I would say, people to be on the city council, who look to me as though they will do his bidding because they don't know better.
Okay,
So
your fellow New Yorker. Thank you for that, Julie. And depressing is all, of course. But
well, there's the good part is there were really good, very, very strong activists trying to lay the groundwork for unseating Jay Jacobs and putting progressives in. But it's always a struggle.
Well, of course, it's the New York Democratic Party that you could argue cost the National Democratic Party control of the Senate.
You could indeed argue that. Yep. We almost lost the governorship because there was nobody on the ground in the election.
And then she turned around, the Democratic governor turned around and basically nominated a right-winger for Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court. I mean,
yes.
Anyway, Ron Leonard, you're a New Yorker. You want to jump in on this? And then we're going to go to Florida and Bryn and Wendy. Go ahead, Ron. Ron Leonard? I'm asking you to unmute here.
Yeah, while Ron is getting ready
I'm
to go.
unmuted. I'm good.
There you go, Ron. Hold on just a second. Let me finish the thought, please. The New York State Democratic Party spent a lot of time sabotaging a woman of color who won the primary to be mayor of Buffalo. And they worked hard with the Republicans to keep her from being elected. Meanwhile, they didn't get in a valid map for the House races in New York. And when it got thrown out by the courts, they had no response because they were too preoccupied with preventing a woman of color from being elected mayor of Buffalo, which she deserved to have been. And rather than take care of their day job, they, including the chair of the DCCC, lost his seat in New York, which was supposed to be an unlosable district, because he was preoccupied with moving his district around to eliminate a progressive candidate of color from being elected. So the New York State Democratic Party has a lot to answer for because they're not about winning elections. They're about keeping women of color, men of color, people of color, and especially progressives from winning elections. And inadvertently or intentionally, it doesn't really matter which, they're losing winnable seats and they're empowering Republicans. And then, as Julie and Sluggo said, when they get into office, when they do win, they appoint Republicans or near Republicans to high office. So they have women of.
Okay. Mike, you disappeared. Ron Leonard, go ahead, Mike.
No, I was done. Go ahead, Ron.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
Okay.
Ron
Great.
Leonard, you're in New Yorker.
I'm in New Yorker.
Let's hear it.
As a New Yorker, I actually knew Sean Patrick Maloney, the congressman that we're discussing, who was the only congressman in New York State that self-identified as being gay, who I went to this first organizing rally in Newburgh, and who, for all apparent purposes, was a supremely good candidate that you would think would support what we would stand for. But in the end, with his help with Nancy Pelosi, redistricted the entire state of New York in such a gerrymandered way that the Supreme Court stepped in and rejiggered it in such a way that Democrats were running against Democrats, and Sean Patrick Maloney lost his own race because he was moved out of the district that he normally would run in. This was Democrats shooting ourselves in our own feet. There is no excuse for it. There's no rationale for it. We should do better. We should know better. We're smarter than that. And this is the failure of corporate democracy to understand the basics and tenet of how things should be done. And I put in the chat an interesting part of history, which I was part of, which was the Democratic unseating of the Daily Machine by, well, what else? Canvassing in Chicago in the 1970s. This is a fundamental reform.
The Harold Washington miracle, that was very important. And of course, Andrea Miller has her roots in that work in Chicago. So, Judith Whitmer, you've restated basically a big part of our mission on these calls, which is to have a progressive grassroots-based movement. And I will remind everybody before we go to Brandon, Florida, that we are in the majority, and the progressives are a majority in this country. Generation X and Generation Y and Generation Z, the millennials and the Zoomers are about 50% of the electorate now, and more than 50% of the electorate are women. And so this is why Donald Trump is not in the White House, and we have the progressive win to our sails in terms of the population. The question is, how do we organize that to win elections? And God knows we're looking at right down the barrel of fascism. And I will repeat, I have never seen a more, I'm older than almost all of you, I have never seen a more terrifying politician than Ron DeSantis. So let's go to Florida now, where again, a progressive was ousted from control of the Democratic Party, or never was allowed to take it. And one of the big issues, of course, is LGBTQ rights. And I've never thought I would say anything like this, but I want to give a clenched fist to the Disney Corporation, of all things, for standing up to Ron DeSantis and for gay rights and for having a national convention for gay rights at Disney World. For God's sakes, who would have thunk it? So Bryn Tannehill, we want to go to you and talk about trans rights, if you would, for a few minutes, and then we'll segue down into the situation in Florida with Wendy Lederman. So Bryn, we're honored to have you with us. You're a multi-published author and your stuff is great. So let us have it, please. Oh, wait, you're muted. How can that be?
There we go. I'm unmuted. Okay, so thank you for having me back. So what's going on in Florida has wider national implications. What we see in Florida and Texas in particular, DeSantis and Abbott both won their re-elections as governor handily. So did everybody else in the Republican Party. Democrats control no statewide offices in either Florida or Texas at this point. A big selling point of these two politicians has been their anti-LGBT work, their anti-wokeness. And what this is part of is the Republicans centering in on getting out the vote with their base, with culture war issues, because a lot of the lower taxes, less government regulation doesn't really get your non-college educated whites out to vote. It also works really, really well singling out those people, people that are regarded as icky. They are using this very much the same way as they used gay marriage back in 2004. This is a national issue, however. Over 475 anti-trans pieces of legislation have been introduced in state legislatures this year. We're only 90 days into the 2023 legislative sessions. In Wisconsin, let me see, with Judge Protasewicz, her opponent is sending out mass text messages accusing his opponent, Protasewicz, of being pro-radical gender ideology and coming for your children and turn them transgender. And a lot of the language being used is very similar to what we saw with lesbians and gays in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s of being child predators and groomers. There's elements of anti-Semitism in this, particularly surrounding their use of tropes about transgender people stealing and mutilating children, and that a cabal of Jewish billionaires is behind the money that's creating the gender ideology movement. And this is all part of a piece of the GOP moving to make transgender people the focus for the 2024 election, the same way they did with the 2004 election. Their guess is that based off the polling data that support for trans people is weak among Democrats, but that conservatives feel very strongly about trans people, meaning that they can create an enthusiasm gap using trans people as a wedge issue. We are going to see in Wisconsin if they are successful, because they're taking a Democrat +1 kind of state and making that the centerpiece through the American Principles Project of the conservative attempts to win that crucial judgeship on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. We also would note that they are not making abortion a focal point. They're steering well clear of that because they don't think that's a winning issue, whereas they do think that they can with culture war issues centering around trans people. Ron DeSantis has done very well with this politically. It plays well to the base, and it doesn't, whatever happens to trans people doesn't infuriate Democrat voters enough to actually pull them to the ballot box, excuse me.
Wow, very well. You know, who are they going to go after when they're done with trans people? I mean, you know.
So it's immigrants would be my next guess, but we have
Okay.
moved. One thing to point out is that the Republican Party has shifted its tone on trans people to a level that we never really saw with mainstream Republicans in 2004. Republicans in 2004 weren't talking about eradicating gays and lesbians. We have moved to prominent Republican broadcasters such as Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles of the Daily Signal talking openly at CPAC about transgenderism must be eradicated from public life, calling it the greatest evil the world faces today. And when you talk about eradicating transgenderism, what they mean is creating a set of laws that makes it impossible for transgender people to function in public or get access to transition-related medical care. And what people don't understand is that they are crafting laws that are designed to make it difficult for trans people to flee to other states or for trans people to get insurance by making it hard for national insurers to provide coverage of healthcare for trans people, not just in deep red states, but in blue states as well. And I wrote about this at the New Republic, that we're headed for a legal constitutional crisis that's probably going to center around abortion first, but trans people are in the mix as well there, because bodily autonomy is something that the GOP is so firmly against, and that whereas trans people don't stir up much passion among Democrats, bodily autonomy and women screaming and dying in bloody screaming pain as they miscarry and doctors unable to perform a DNC is something that the public does actually care about.
Amazing. I think that people in Florida, if I lived in Florida, I think I would put on a pink triangle. People have to remember that the Nazis exterminated gays right along with Jews and gypsies and Jehovah's Witnesses, for God's sakes. Who knows why? But this is critical stuff. Thank you, Brim. Wendy Lederman, do you want to meld that into what Der Fuhrer is doing in Florida there?
Thank you, and thanks for joining us again, Bern. Always great to see you.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's like I start to stutter when I try to figure out like where to start with all the crazy bills. I know you mentioned something about immigration being the next, and I apologize, I missed part of what you said. My computer just went on protest
Okay.
for a second, dropped off. But so yeah, with immigration, and it just shows the extreme lengths that they'll go, and I'm almost curious, like when like more violence and enforcement could begin for these things. But with immigration, they want to make it a felony to house or transport someone who's undocumented, including your own family, your spouse. I mean, and so again, it's like, where does the enforcement come in? They want to spend $10 million on that transport program that they were doing. And so with some of the gay rights and the transgender, like one that pops into my head is there's a bill right now that would make it so that if you're transgender, like it has to do with like the correct sex bathrooms and facilities. So if somebody asks you to leave a bathroom, you have to go, otherwise it's a crime. And that could put some people in a dangerous situation if they go into a facility where, you know, they might not be able to defend themselves against any kind of aggression. They want to end gay marriage. They want to redefine gay marriage is another bill that's here. The use of flags. I mean, and also in schools with, you know, the Don't Say Gay thing, but they also want to make it so that little girls can't talk about menstruation if before 6th grade. So if someone starts their cycle before 6th grade, then they can't speak about it. And there's also one for sexually transmitted diseases, like intentionally infecting people. They want to reduce the sentence or the punishment for that. And then there's other things that kind of go further into like law enforcement and censorship, which I think all ties in together, because it's, you know, when you have to have proper law enforcement and proper court cases and insurance, fairness, and press in order to maintain the holistic system. So for certain things, they want to create like defamation suits, like journalist privilege won't count. And if you say something bad about a public official and you could be sued for it, police excessive force, the cops won't be able to be fired for using excessive force, which we know that, you know, that could definitely come down on trans people and any kind of racism. And even in courtrooms, like say you have a court case, they want to make it so that you can't really speak about what happens in the courtroom, which is the 6th Amendment, right? Because you have public and open trials. And insurance as well, like they want to make it really easy for the insurance companies basically to have carte blanche, like whether that's housing or health insurance or whatever it is. So you have a lot of disabled people that are, I mean, we have just recently there was like hundreds of people.
Wendy, I don't mean to break in, but we only have a few minutes left with Bryn, and she wanted to make one more comment, if that's okay.
Go ahead, Bryn, and then I'm going to pick it up. Myra had a hand. Wendy, thank you for that, and we'll continue with it. Bryn, go ahead.
Sorry, Wendy. I just wanted to throw in one more atrocity going on in Florida. HB 1421 basically says that Florida courts won't cooperate with other courts if a child undergoing gender transition is involved, which is to say that if a parent a non-custodial parent in California kidnaps their child who is trans, takes them to Florida, Florida courts will not cooperate with attempts to extradite the child or the parent who has done the kidnapping, which leads, but then you also have California setting up sanctuary laws, which kind of do the same thing. So if you had a custodial parent go back to Florida, re-kidnap their own kid and take them back to California, now you have the situation where California won't cooperate with Florida's attempts to extradite and Florida won't do the vice versa. And we also have laws that make it illegal to abet any kind of transition. So even using a transgender child's preferred name is becoming a crime in a lot of states here. But what I'd like to highlight is, I wrote about this as part of the constitutional crisis, but when you have states that are basically legalizing going into other states and kidnapping people to bring them back, you're starting to get into the territory where we were in 1853 and 1858 with the Fugitive Slave Act and Dred Scott. This is not a good place for a functional modern democracy to be.
Thank you. Myra, and then I want to raise an issue on the free speech.
Bryn, thank you. Bryn, if you just have a minute more, I'm wondering if you can tie in, because we're going to be talking about banned books. And it's my understanding that the Germans, the first burning of books was actually, they were burning books about trans medical procedures. Can you talk about that?
That's correct. So in 1933, April of 1933, very, very shortly after the Enabling Acts, no, just before the Enabling Acts, actually, Nazi youth, 20-somethings, stormed Magnus Hirschfeld's library at the University of Berlin, der Institut der Sexuellen Freiheit. Don't speak German, but the Institute for Sexuality. Magnus Hirschfeld was a pioneer in the field of human sexuality, including homosexuality, and what was referred to as transsexualism then. He performed some of the first transsexual surgeries. The movie and book, The Danish Girl, were based off of his history. In the history of one of the first people to receive surgical gender reassignment surgery. But it was, in fact, Hirschfeld's books that were the first burned. And whenever you look at pictures of Nazi burning books, of raiding a library or hurling books into a fire in the early Nazi pillbox style hats that the police wore, that is Magnus Hirschfeld's library being burned in all probability.
Well, thank you for that, Myra. And we're really moved and terrified by what you're saying. Wendy has compiled, I believe, a sort of a master list of the kinds of things that DeSantis is doing. Is that right, Wendy?
Yes, thank you, Harvey, and I'll drop it in the chat. And one more I wanted to mention that goes with what Bryn was saying is that SB 254, which is actually like moving ahead in process, it allows for custody removal of kids whose parents take them outside of the state for transition therapy. So he's extending his reach beyond just the state lines, like without even having to confer with other courts. If you take your kid across the state lines to get therapy, conversion therapy, you can have that kid taken away from you.
All right, and here's one. Thank you for that, Wendy. And here's one that's beyond terrifying. And I saw DeSantis give this speech. He wants Florida courts to uphold lawsuits against journalists who criticize public figures and refuse to disclose their sources. And his line is that a journalist who attacks someone else, a public figure, that public figure can sue. And if the sources are kept secret, that is a presumption of malice. Now, I can't even begin to describe how earth-shattering that is, because malice is one of the defenses that is widely used in libel cases. You have to prove malice in many cases on the part of the journalist. And what he's saying is, if the journalist protects their sources, which is pro forma for investigative journalism, then he or she, they are presumed to be malicious. And they can, any Florida court under him can take up any case from anywhere in the United States. So if you're a journalist in California and you malign a public figure, that public figure can take the court case to Florida and sue you in Florida. And if you defend your sources, there is a presumption of malice. That, it's staggering. It is a total destruction of the First Amendment, complete leveling of the First Amendment. And this guy is serious about it. I'm sure that you're all aware that it has been thoroughly documented that Ron DeSantis at very least witnessed, if not participated in torture at Guantanamo while he was a SEAL. So, like I say, I am not terrified of Donald Trump for very many reasons. I am terrified of Ron DeSantis. And if the progressive movement in this country can't transcend the utter worthlessness of the Democratic Party, then we're going to wind up with this guy. And that's the end of it. He is really the end. Trump was not the end for all the various reasons that we can surmise. Ron DeSantis, and you see him speak, he's not very charismatic in some ways, but he's basically Big Brother. I mean, he drones on like it's artificial unintelligence or real unintelligence or whatever it is. But this guy went to both Harvard and Yale, and he's been a SEAL, and he's participated in torture. And here we are. And they are going full bore. You can't get a more basic attack on journalism than presuming malice on the part of a journalism who will not reveal their sources. I mean, that's as hardcore as it gets. And because of the nature of the internet and the media, any of the modern media, any case that anybody wants to bring to destroy a journalist can be brought in Florida. There's no reason why not. So there you go, Tatanka and then Wendy again.
Well, it sounds like to me that they would like to bring that case before the corporate Republican Supreme Court to basically undo and erase any influence of Dan Ellsberg.
Or Julian Assange.
Or Julian Assange.
Any investigative journalist will be absolutely hamstrung by that ruling. A presumption of malice it wipes out all presumption of innocence and all ability of any investigative reporter to function.
Well, we have to remember that, that case that was argued before the Supreme Court that Danny Sheehan actually argued was key to ending, one of the things, key to ending the Vietnam War. You don't have that, you don't have an end to war either.
No, you don't. Wendy Lederman?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say that we're lacking any kind of resemblance of logic or democracy, and Harvey's absolutely right when he's frightening, just absolutely frightening. Last week you brought up the word sociopath. I mean, clearly he has no regard or empathy or feeling for the human condition or others. But what is most alarming is the way that there's no honor for existing law. Like, there's so many bills here, and this isn't just DeSantis. These are, I'm calling his minions as well. These are other senators and House representatives that are introducing these other bills. So that's very, very concerning. And the way that they want to end any kind of home rule, any kind of local ordinance on greenhouse gas emissions, and like making it so that you basically can't stop any kind of permitting, giving away the whole barn to corporations, and like in all senses. I'm not even going to get into the details, but all senses of that. There's regard, like the way he redrew the map, like he really thinks he's king. And someone put in the chat that they don't understand why their friends in Florida support him. And there's just something, it's like the people are his fans are just so caught up with like the ego, like they're not seeing what he's actually doing. And it just is just a really frightening situation, because then it's like the whole woke thing just becomes like such an annoyance, and like being woke, which doesn't even have an actual definition, has no value in society. So anyone that promulgates any kind of thing that's against what their wonderful leader says, it's like it really is a comparison between what happened in Germany or what happened in Chile, and yeah, I mean, they're like just no regard for democracy whatsoever, and it's just terrifying.
Right, and the term woke, by the way, I'm sure you all know, originated in Ferguson, Missouri, and it very simply referred to people who were aware of the history of what had been done and the ongoing tragedy of what's being done to people of color. And you know, they've taken this term woke and turned it into some kind of monster. It's ridiculous. All it means is that you're aware, you're awake to injustice and the improprieties that are going around you. And suddenly woke has become this big whatever. It's ridiculous. Tatanka?
Yeah, to circle back to the earlier discussion and to focus on what's in our control, as progressives, we can see what's happening and that we need a long-term strategy as well. At our meeting, at our Circle of 100 meeting last Wednesday, in which Danny Sheehan and Dolores Huerta have quite a conversation back and forth, as they often do. Dolores mentioned she's on the board of People for American Way, along with other things, and she mentioned a recent poll that she hasn't sent me yet, but I wanted to know who did it. Basically, of 18 to 36-year-olds who support Biden's candidacy, and another question that indicates that basically they understand they're looking at 2028, and it parallels the Sunrise movement that works really strongly with all progressives at down races, state level, local level, with the understanding that as Bernie and AOC and everybody is sort of frozen with Biden now within the Democratic Party, our strength is to really strengthen our grassroots at the state, local, regional level, so that we can win everything we can, keep Biden in the primaries as much to the left as possible. He'll do what he needs to do in the finals to win if he's still running. I mean, the situation is so fluid, but to look to 2028, not just to 2024. And I think the Sunrise kids understand that. They're very sanguine. They're very realistic about what's possible, and they're in it because they say these are our lives. We are responsible to take our generation to run this country in a responsible way, and so it isn't all up to the next. You know, it is in one level, but it's not all up to the next 18 months. We're looking at 2028. I just wanted to bring that perspective.
Well, the question, you know, I have for the people who are arguing that Biden should not run again is who do you got? Who will run in 2024 if it's not Biden? And you know, when I sit on the machine at the club, I watch Fox, and they're all just joyously tearing Kamala Harris to shreds. No one's talking about running her at this point in time. So if you don't have Biden, who do you got? And you know, Alexandria Cortez is, you know, be a great candidate in many ways. She is old enough legally, but barely. And I don't see the Democratic Party making the leap from Joe Biden to AOC at this point in time. But but we got to be the one thing we know for sure is that we have to be the two things we know for sure is, number one, we have to protect paper hand-marked ballots so that we get a vote count, and that we have to understand that that's why Donald Trump is not in the White House. And the other monumental thing that's happened within the last couple of weeks, very important to us as Americans, we've known for many years now that Richard Nixon committed treason in 1968 and completely turned a presidential election. We've known that. There's not an argument about it. There has been an argument about 1980 and the idea that the Reagan people deliberately kept the hostages. That argument is now over because this guy came out from Texas and said, hey, I went with John Connally, and we did indirectly through all the Middle Eastern governments ask the Iranians, tell the Iranians to not let the hostages go so Reagan would win and they get a better deal. There's no more debate about the 1968 or 1980 elections. We also know that the 2000 election was turned by a violent mob. There's no doubt about that in South Florida. So you have three elections, absolutely no doubt, were turned by acts of treason and illegality. I would argue, and we've been arguing since 2004, that election was stolen also with touchscreen voting machines. And that's a lot of where this movement was born in Ohio, 2004, but we still get pushback on that. And the main pushback we get, of course, is from the Democrats. Nonetheless, to go into 2024, the other thing, in addition to protecting the ballots, hand-marked paper ballots, digitally scanned, is that the money has to go to the grassroots. And the Democratic Party, as we've discussed many times on these calls, is just a hollow fundraising shell that sends out a zillion emails, brings in the money, spends it on TV advertising, builds no grassroots, and takes commissions on the ads that they put on TV. And that's all they do. That's all the Democratic Party is. And in writing my history of the United States, which I'm just finishing, the most painful part of it all was writing about the Clinton administration. You know, if we're going to bust our buns to get another Clinton administration, forget about it. Biden has been somewhat better than the Clintons were. But, you know, these are the two pillars on which we have to stand. We need hand-marked paper ballots that we can protect, and we need grassroots organizing that can transcend the Democratic Party, or we're lost. We're screwed, as it were. Julie Weiner from New York, did you want to comment very quickly?
Thanks. Yes, I have two brief comments. One, Transportation Secretary Buttigieg, who was talked about some, is now absolutely out because of his completely, which frankly I think is fortunate because he's really a moderate. Because
moderate
of his
is kind.
Yes, I agree. Because of his failure to supervise the rail, and frankly, Biden really messed up in his lack of support for the railroad workers' strike. So, but at least we're not going to, you know, nobody's going to try and plug Buttigieg in after that disaster in East Palestine.
No.
And then my other comment, yes, we absolutely need hand-marked paper ballots, but that's far from enough. There's just a very good Susan Greenhalgh of Free Speech for People is now circulating a petition to demand that the FBI investigate the consequence, or the Justice Department take action to investigate the consequences of the theft of the Dominion software and publication of Dominion software online. How is that going to affect the probability of the election actually being stolen? I mean, Dominion is, you know, I love their nice little distraction lawsuit against Fox, but that's all it is, because we don't know yet. We don't know whether Dominion has repaired the vulnerabilities, the 9 vulnerabilities that CISA has admitted were discovered in the Georgia lawsuit against the Dominion ICX. Georgia activists are trying to get the Dominion ICX out. And we also don't know yet the consequences of the Republicans' theft of the voting machine programs and publication of Dominion voting machine software programs online.
Okay.
So anyway, I'm going to find that link and post it in the chat so people can please sign the Free Speech for People petition.
Okay, thank you for that, Julie. We're going to wrap this part up. We are going to talk about the war against solar, which Ron Leonard knows a lot about, and it was escalating now to other states. What they've been doing in California on the net metering, they're doing in other states now. Clearly, a national campaign. Jeffrey Varka, 1 point very quickly, please, and then we're going to. Jeffrey, go ahead, Jeffrey, and then anyone else wants to raise a hand, please do before we move back to the environment.
Wendy's got her hand.
While we've been speaking and while you guys have been speaking, I've been looking up how to stop fascism, and I found a lot, including I think who we should invite next to this meeting, Paul Masson, the guy, a person who wrote a book called How to Stop Fascism: History, Ideology, Resistance.
All right, very good.
I've been putting all this stuff in the chat box of how to stop fascism. And remember this: if Ron DeSantis does run for president, then the best way to stop him is to remind the people of America, of all the bad things that he's done in both his military and political career, and show absolute proof that he's a fascist, and remind the people what Mussolini's Italy, Franco's Spain, Suharto's Indonesia, Punchet's Chile, and yes, even Hitler's Germany have done.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, unfortunately, that would probably help him win the Republican nomination.
What's that?
I said, unfortunately, that would probably help him win the Republican nomination.
Well, unfortunately, in terms of history, the one effective thing that's happened to stop fascism was called World War II, and I don't think we can afford that another time around here. Especially disturbing, by the way, is the which I didn't talk about at the top of the hour, is that Putin now is talking about moving nuclear weapons into Ukraine. And if you've been reading the reports on Zaporizhia, 6 reactors, they are literally, the 6 reactors at Zaporizhia are literally hanging by a thread. There is one power line coming into Zaporizhia to power the cooling that's needed on the 6 reactors that the Russians have been fooling with in Ukraine. And, you know, they could go at any minute. Any one of those reactors could go at any minute. So God help us all. Thank you for that, Jeffrey. Wendy, do you want to jump in? And then we're going to Ron Leonard and talk quickly about the expansion of the war on solar. Wendy, go ahead.
Thank you. And we also have Dr. John Cobb here from Living Earth Movement on the call.
Oh, all
as
right,
well.
good. We can have him speak as well. Go ahead. Oh, do you want? Should we go to him now?
Yeah. Can I just make one quick, like 30-second point? And thank you. Yeah, just we were talking. We got on the national talk of 24 and 28, but I just wanted to say that, you know, what we're seeing is, like, even if like only a fraction of these things get pushed in Florida, they're pushing the pendulum to shift the paradigm towards the fascist far right. And so I think it's just really, really important, especially in the education races, for the down ballot races, for regular people to get involved and to run for school board and run for these little things as like an infiltrated protest of not just like sitting and standing with their sign up, like get involved in the politics and encourage people around you to run for the smaller offices on the point of countering these fascist measures, because the Democratic Party is only going to allow for the controlled opposition of knowing how far that they can push without actually changing anything. They'll go right up to that line. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the thing that's the most terrifying about Ron DeSantis, certainly in contrast to Donald Trump, is that DeSantis went to Harvard and Yale, and his attack on democracy is incredibly systematic and extremely sophisticated. These people know exactly what they are doing, and their primary enemy is democracy. Trump was, you know, just a buffoon. He didn't care. He was Yeltsin, basically. And DeSantis is Putin. This guy really has a systemic mind. He hates democracy, and not a big fan of LGBTQ or people of color either. And the only thing that we're hanging on to by thread here is there you go. Look at this.
Sluggo, real quick, Hetty has to go in a few minutes. So if you want to.
Okay, so all right, good. Well, thank you
Monticello.
for that deeply depressing 2 hours. But you know, the bottom line, never forget, is that we do have the majority. Our people are younger, and they are women who are more powerful. This is the last gasp of the white male Christian Puritan, whatever, and they're hanging on by their fingernails, and we need to clip them. And Ron DeSantis, to me, is the most terrifying embodiment of that. Hetty, Tripp, you are in St. Cloud, Minnesota. You're not far from the very old reactor at Monticello. Can you tell us what's going on there, please?
Okay, can you all see this? So I put together a very quick piece. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So it's people who know the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and Paul, it's about 35 miles upstream. So the plant is 35 miles upstream I'm in St. Cloud, you can see that there. And the Mississippi River is what goes through the plant and down to the Gulf. This is the leak has gone to this amount. It's supposedly still within the plant's area. And then what I did was I put together very quickly what I call reality, fantasy, and even more reality. So it started shutting it down last Friday. And we have to recognize this is extreme for Xcel Energy. The fantasy is that Minnesota Pollution Control said they wouldn't have shut it down. So, you know, we have to see who is lying and what's truth, knowing that the industry always plays down the significance of tritium leaks. Xcel tried to do a quick patch and failed. They put a container underneath the pipe to catch the leaking water of tritium and then send it back to the processing system. The container no longer could capture it basically overflowed. It's in the groundwater. Xcel still saying, you know, it doesn't pose a threat. The reality is that the initial leak in November was 400,000. This is supposedly hundreds of gallons. We don't know how much. And will the river, you saw how the Mississippi goes through it. Will it be affected? They said there's so much water in the Mississippi, it will dilute it. Again, I'd say it's a fantasy. That it's not a danger is a fantasy. Unlikely that it would reach drinking water supply, a fantasy. And the key thing here is it will pass the cost of cleaning up to the ratepayers. Does that give you a good overview of what's happening, Sluggo?
Yeah, go back to the map, Hetty, please. I want everybody to understand this is the headwater of the Mississippi River, for God's sakes, which ends down in New Orleans. And they're dumping radioactive tritium into the headwaters of the Mississippi, which are going to go through Minneapolis and St. Paul, and then well, not St. Paul, but Minneapolis, and then believe it or not, right here, south of Minneapolis, in the Mississippi River, are two more atomic reactors. Right in the middle of the damn river, it's called Prairie Island. And on Prairie Island, which is next to an indigenous reservation, there are two much larger reactors than Monticello. And clearly all the radioactive water that's dumped into the plant from the plant in Monticello into the headwaters of the Mississippi is going to go down to New Orleans and then into the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, you know, tell me a better plan for exterminating the human race, please.
Yeah, and remember fantasy and reality that we have to analyze. But Sluggo, just 1 minute. In terms of Minnesota, because of the trifecta of House, Senate, and the governor's office being Democratic, they have overturned the state law barring anyone on felony probation if they could vote. So now what we call returning residents, this is a term that Angela Davis used, they can now vote. And also they're also looking at ranking votes. That's still being discussed. Over
we have Keith Ellison is Keith Ellison going to be involved in prosecuting any of this stuff going on at Monticello?
I don't know. That's a good question to send out. At the moment, you know, they're trying to quell any public outcry. People are worried, and that's all that's happening.
Well, this reactor opened what, in 1970? This reactor is 53 years old?
It's 50 some years old.
It's insane that this thing, well, it's insane it was built in the first place. A 53-year-old reactor. This reactor was designed on slide rules. This reactor was put into place before there were computers that could have any impact on its design. I mean, you got to be out of your mind. Now, it's shut right now. Is that right, Hetty?
Yep. They shut it down Friday, or started to shut it down Friday. You know, you can't just simply pull a switch.
God almighty. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Minnesota fighting the 2 reactors at Prairie Island. We had a nuclear waste issue, and we were able. We had the reactors on the brink of shutdown, and the Democrats, of course, stabbed us in the back. But we did force Northern States Power, which is now Xcel, to buy a ton of wind power. And the origin of much of the utility scale wind industry actually came out of the fight over the Prairie Island reactors in 1994, which was spearheaded by Greenpeace along with the local groups. So that much we can take credit for. But Prairie Island is still operating. Let's hope to God that Monticello never reopens. I mean, that's what's got to happen now. This reactor cannot be allowed to reopen. And Hetty, I'm sure since you're up there, it's all taken care of, and we appreciate it.
I don't think so, but I'll send an email to Keith, see where they are on it. And then, by the way,
we have
also,
got to keep this reactor shut. I mean,
but there's also good solar here. Ruth and Derek just got some solar panels on their house in Minneapolis, so that's good.
Well, you got to remember that solar panels work better in cold weather. And, you've got a lot of sunlight in Minnesota, along with Colorado and the other Great Plains states, and it's cold. So that's the optimum situation.
Hetty,
but the wind industry in Minnesota is really, in many ways, the homeland of the birthplace of the utility scale American wind industry, and it had a lot to do with the fight at Prairie Island. So
Milo was trying to say something.
Milo,
thank
please.
you. Thanks, Hetty. I have a question. Do you know whether any of these leaking pipes are buried underground, or are they all above the surface?
Supposedly that was above the surface between 2 buildings. That's why they couldn't see it. But again,
Because I read several of the articles about this new development, and as you were saying, the fantasy is that there's no harm to the public, and that tritium is weak, and it's not a problem. And the nuclear industry has been downplaying the impact of tritium on human health and on all life forms forever, or at least for the last 50 years, because one of the problems is that you said that the public is going to have to pay the cost of cleanup, but we don't know how to remove tritium from water. And one of the articles that I read mentioned that tritium can't penetrate the skin. Well, what if you drink tritiated water? Then the tritium actually can migrate to every organ in the body. It can migrate to the brain, it can migrate to the liver, etc., to the heart, every organ in the body. And what it does is it emits beta radiation that is powerful enough, energetic enough to unravel the chromosomes in adjacent cells and start a reaction that eventually can lead to malignant tumors and other serious health consequences. So tritium's nothing to downplay. It's really very serious. It's extremely harmful. John Goffman spoke out about it and taught us about it years ago. And this is a serious problem, and hopefully it will lead to the permanent closure of Monticello, and hopefully the 93 atomic reactors that are still churning out poisonous, lethal substances all over this country.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. See you soon. Yes, I'm sorry about that. Beta, by the way, is an electron. All those.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Sorry.
All those millions of gallons of water that are stored at Fukushima are it's all tritiated. I mean, it's you got to wonder about our species, for God's sakes. Joan, thank you for that, Myra. Joan Seaman, and then Dorothy Reich. Joan Seaman, are you unmuted? There we go. And Dorothy will unmute you. Okay, go ahead, Joan.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, Xcel Energy is my electric provider. And I did studies on Monticello and Prairie Island. But this brought up something that, as long as I've been looking at nuclear reactors and Rocky Flats nuclear waste, we had a Great Western Reservoir that had provided tritium as drinking water to a whole city. Long, very controversial issue, but I just want to let you know that I just put it in the chat that this is nothing new for nuclear reactors, which was a shock to me. That they, and so I put it in there. It's the New York Times saw this even in the early 90s, that 34 nuclear reactors were leaking tritium. So that's the first that I had learned about it, besides Great Western Reservoir giving Broomfield a great dose of tritium in the drinking water. But what I wanted to tell you was Rocky Flats, they had measured tritium. They measured tritium, and it was considered classified information released into the air. So, I think, and I didn't know what tritium really was. Why are they all concerned about tritium? I guess Portsmouth, Ohio, or Piketon, tritium is it's not the trigger, but it is what do you say? What is it? It's not the trigger, but it is, like a firecracker. It is the fuel. And so they track tritium around the country, and they've been doing it at these nuclear power plants for some time. So I won't go any further, but that is something that, it's leaking at Pantex. It's just all over. And I said, my God, why would Rocky Flats call it a confidential information? So thanks.
Thank you, Joan. Dorothy Reich? Are you unmuted? I had you unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah. You just muted me. All right.
No, you're good.
So I just wanted to change the subject a little. I guess you guys all know that there was another school shooting today.
Yes, we started with that.
Okay, so they just found out that it's as soon as I heard, I said it's somebody gay or transgender who was tortured by this Christian school. And it turns out that I'm correct. It's a transgender. They're calling her Audrey, so I don't know if it's someone who transitioned from male to female, or that's her birth sex. I don't know. But tormenting these people is just gonna making AK-15s and stuff available to people. They're gonna catch on. People who are not violent are going to become violent. My question is, what is the right going to go for? Is it going to go for the money or for the misogyny?
Both.
Because I think the thought of women or trans women carrying around AK-15s could be terrifying to some men. So we'll have to see where this leads. But this is
not to a good place, that's for sure. I do want to thank you, Dorothy. And I'm seeing you reminds me, I was not at the memorial yesterday for Jerry Manpearl, or Saturday for our beloved brother. I wrote a memorial for him. I could never have read it. So thank you, Nancy and Mara, for reading it. I'm tearing up now. I really miss this guy, Jerry Manpearl. He was a wonderful human being, and we owe him a tremendous amount. I do want to give some credit. I usually go before these calls to the gym, and I sit on the exercise machine and watch the news, and the news was all about the shooting. But there was on the sports channel, the National Hockey League, of all people, has done a gay support day. They painted the hockey sticks with rainbows, and these guys are all having, in their shirts that they beat the hell out of each other with, they're wearing rainbow-colored jerseys. It's pretty mind-boggling, actually. If you just told me 50 years ago that the National Hockey League, of all people, would do this, it's pretty amazing. And it was a reminder also because some of the teams decided to refrain. This is the global world we live in, because they have Russian players. And if they feared that if the Russian players wore pro-gay stuff, their families would be punished by Putin, who is a psychotic anti-gay guy. So there you go. But anyway, thank you for the National Hockey League for that. And you know, another day, another shooting. One of the networks ran a chart. There have been more than 100 mass shootings already this year. Think of that. It's April. More than 100. It's not even April. It's March. More than 100 mass shootings already in the United States this year. I mean, come on. Mila, did you have a hand here, Mila? And then we're going to go.
I do.
Okay, we'll go quickly from you to Ron.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, you know, tritium it's a radioactive isotope of hydrogen. And as many people know, hydrogen gas is really quite explosive. And it's actually, it was used to boost the yield of a fission weapon. And it changed our nuclear bombs into thermonuclear bombs. It greatly amplified the yield. So Tatanka also often tells us about how the nuclear weaponry relies on commercial nuclear power plants in order to produce components for these nuclear bombs that we have. And so I just wanted to, someone else talked about tritium being used in nuclear weapons, and it's specifically used to boost the yield of the weapon.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Greatly, greatly. Sometimes I think it was something like 100 times the yield of the bombs that were used in Japan.
Well, it went from the tritium is part of the hydrogen bomb, which is fusion as opposed to fission, and that you know, that was the big step forward, or down.
Right.
Sorry, you know. And okay, Dorothy, do you still have your hand up, or are you done? You're yeah. Yes. Did you have anything further to say?
So I forgot to mention that school that she shot up was a K through 6. So that means that this shooter was carrying this grudge around. She's 28 years old.
Right.
For 20 years or so. And well, 12 years old, so 16 years carrying this grudge around. And how many more are there?
Right. Okay, thank you for that. We are at, we've been going at it for 2 hours, more than 2 hours and 10 minutes. We still have, for God's sakes, 42 people with us. Thank you all for staying with it. I promise, and I do want to end with one thing very quickly, and then we'll disperse. Once again, it's a joy to be with all you people. It's just the high point of my week, and I'm just, it's wonderful. And here we are. This was the 131st gathering. And we are very clear we're going to go through 2014. So thank you so much. Ron Leonard, you sent me, I believe, a clipping that in North Carolina, they're going after net metering the same way they've been doing it in California. So this must be a Koch brothers cookie cutter assault on solar energy. Do you want to make a quick comment on that, and then we'll sign off? Oh, you're not muted. You're still not unmuted.
So the new term is the Koch brother, of course.
Right.
And you know, this is the case of what does Texas and North Carolina have in common? It's basically following California to kill solar, and the way that California did it is exactly the way that North Carolina is doing it. Is killing this term called net metering. Net metering is a fair trade where if you put any power back on the line from your solar system on your roof because you're not home that day, you have a fair reimbursement. Real simple. And of course, it's so simple that California figured out how to make that reimbursement next to nothing. And North Carolina is following it up. And Texas, who was famous for having an open grid. If you want to have a Bitcoin operation, or if you want to put a solar farm in, or if you want to put a wind farm in, come to Texas and do it there. Well, they just killed that in Texas. The Senate is pushing forward a bill that basically stop renewable energy. Thank you very much, Texas. How's that working out for you?
Yeah. Well, here we have California giving $1 billion+ to Diablo Canyon, taking Fed money, another $1 billion+, saying they need the energy, and at the same time doing everything they can to kill solar. You know, you got to wonder about our species. You really do. I do want to mention one thing. I'm wearing a sweatshirt from my daughter, Abby Sophia. She's a professional photographer and was honored last week. I had to leave early in a beautiful ceremony. So I am a proud father and grandfather. Thank you for all that. And very proud to be with all you people after 2 hours and 25 minutes. Steve Caruso, do you want to say something? And then we're going to march off.
Sluggo, we still have Dr. Cobb, who's been waiting to give a report.
Yes. I'm sorry. Great. Wendy, do you want to introduce this presenter very quickly, this great environmental group?
Thank you so much. Yeah, Dr. Cobb's been waiting so patiently, and he was kind enough to fit us in today when they were scrambling. So Living Earth Movement, I recently came across them actually through Stanley Portis' other network. They had a wonderful presentation, and what it seems like they're about is like diplomacy between nations to create a greater, greener world. And I'll let Dr. Cobb speak, and hopefully maybe next week we can have someone from the group come back and speak a little bit longer, but hopefully we can hear a little bit from Dr. Cobb. Thank you so much, Dr. Cobb, for joining us.
Dr. Cobb, yes, thank you for sticking with us. I'm sorry if we were rude to keep you waiting so long, and I hope you'll give us a teaser and come back next week with more substance. But go ahead.
Well, I'll just tell you that there are people who think that the planet has very little chance of surviving as a habitable place for human beings if we do not have cooperation among nations, and particularly cooperation between the United States and China. And there have been efforts in that direction. There have been committees formed. Biden and Xi both believe in cooperation, but unfortunately, Biden believes more that the United States should be the unipolar power in the world. That is, no other country should be genuinely independent of the United States. The goal is to have a single world market, and a single world market requires a single global ruler, and that's the mission of the United States. That would be the positive way to frame the neoconservative policy. But of course, the result is that countries that don't want to be servants of the United States, that want to make their own decisions, are automatically regarded as enemies. And enemy number one is now China, so that the hope that China and the United States will genuinely cooperate to come up with global solutions. They are the two greatest economies, they are the two greatest polluters, and between them, they can give, I think if they agree on something, even something rather radical, and of course we need some radical changes, not just minor ones, that the rest of the world, or many of the rest of the countries, will be willing to follow. It becomes very discouraging because the American press, which means the powers behind the American government, are aiming toward war with China rather than cooperation. My own view is, if we have a war of that kind, the chances of solving the problem of global warming, or the problem of the poisoning of the oceans and the poisoning of the land, poisoning of the air, any of these enormous problems is unsolvable, even if we solve a lot of the little problems. The big problems will destroy us. So we feel very strongly that it's important. So we have several projects. I don't think I have time to really tell you.
Well, we'll welcome you to come next week.
I think Ignacio Pastora will come next week.
Well, we appreciate that. And many hours ago, I opened this session by pointing out the significance of the events, essentially of the spring solstice equinox this year, where she went to Moscow and he and Putin broke bread, as they say. And
Yes.
if you add China, India, Russia, Iran, some of the countries of Africa into an axis, who's going to care about the United States? And
In,
let's start with
in
the
my
current-
view, the United States is shooting itself in its own foot. It had a chance of making a huge leap, giving wonderful leadership, but it decided that the ways of giving leadership were by punishing other countries and trying to directly bully them. And this has alienated the world to a very large extent. It's a very
Absolutely. And as a historian, I will point out that except for the last 200 years, the last 5,000 years of human civilization, China has always been the richest country on earth. Without, there's we're all preoccupied with European history and what's happened in the United States. China has sat there quietly, the Middle Kingdom, has never conquered other countries, and has just sat there and been rich. In the last couple of hundred years, they were too conservative and didn't buy in to the technological revolution until Chairman Mao came along. And so, with the Chinese Revolution, communist though it may have been, suddenly 70 years later, you see the fruits of a recent revolution. Please come back, John Cobb, and with your cohorts. I'm sorry to have kept you waiting so long. I hope it was of interest to you. We still have 39 people with us. So at any rate, thank you. Thank you, Wendy, for bringing Mr. Cobb in. Steve Caruso, we'll go to you, please. And John, if you'll put the links to your organization in the chat, I'm sure many people will be interested. Okay? Thank you.
Unfortunately,
I
I
got
don't
it
belong.
for you, Don.
Wendy, can you do that? Can you put the links to his chat, to organization? in the
Just-
chat?
Sorry to interrupt.
John was just
I
trying
did-
to speak. Let's hear from him.
John, go ahead.
We'll just have to do it next week.
Okay.
I don't belong to
or
this.
You can get one of your
I'm 98 years old, and I just I have not learned to participate in the late modern world.
Well, see, what I do is I get my grandchildren and they help me with my iPhone.
Exactly.
The most amusing part of their day. Steve Caruso, you want to wrap us up? Thank you
Sure.
again, John.
Thank you, John. God bless you. I did post that earlier.
You're breaking up, Steve.
Steve, you always break up on us. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Ruth will give you the last word. Ruth Strauss. Thank you, Jeffrey. Until next week, that would be great. We can't hear you. You're breaking up. We'd love to hear what you say, but we can't read your lips. So please,
John, you were great.
Please try and fix your audio. Ruth Strauss, will you take us out, please? Ruth Strauss, you're unmuted. Then we're going to rock and roll here.
Harvey, you're wonderful and articulate, but I don't think "take us out" is a good expression right now. but anyway, what I wanted to say.
Bring us together, please.
Yeah, right. You've been so great, and everybody that's spoken today has been great, including the Whitmer from I'm sorry, I can't remember what state.
She was quite amazing.
But Nevada. But anyway, Marilyn Bernstein was on the call, and she's always had some interesting things to say about North Carolina, not to mention she was physically, attacked when she was trying to, do whatever there. So maybe you can have her back on for an update at some point. Thanks.
Okay, definitely. And I want to say hi to my friend Anna Georgie, who I think just recently went to Germany and maybe at some point can give us a wrap up of what's going on. Okay, folks, it's 7:20 Eastern time. And we've been gone for almost about 2.5 hours. I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much. Steve, if we can fix your audio, we'd love to hear what you have to say.
Harvey, I have a question for you.
Please.
Are you going to go jump in the ocean now?
I am indeed. And as you can see, that's what behind me is downtown Trenton, New Jersey after global warming. So that's where I'm going to go jump. All right.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
What's that, Steve?
You can hear me now, right?
Yes. What do you want to say?
Very good. So I was going to piggyback about Texas. But Texas just bought Safe Harbor, which was centered where the 86 Ohio thing happened. And they're also
Can't hear you, dear.
fields.
Steve, you're our engineer.
Lean in,
You're the
lean
one
in.
guy. You're our engineer on whom we all depend, and you're the one guy we haven't been able to hear. Please try and fix it. We want to know what you have to say. Oh, there's Anna.
Technology, ain't it wonderful?
Okay, you guys, thank you so much. No nukes. We will be back next week. This was our 131st gathering, and we're as good as ever. So much appreciated. We'll see you next week. No nukes and no more stolen elections.
Happy spring.
Thanks, Logo.
No nukes
Thanks,
and
everyone.
sunny days.
Ha.
Stephen.
Great job again, Harvey. Terrific.
Great job.
There we go. Yes. Live long and prosper.
No, you got to spread the finger. It's a different thing.
I'm not going to
So-
do this. I can't.
It's easy.
So-
You just do that.
Solar to the
I can do
people.
that.
Thanks
You-
to all the others like Wendy Lederman and all the others who helped.
Solar
Thank
to
you,
the
Wendy.
people,
Thank you,
right
Mike.
on.
Thank you, Steve Caruso. Dr. Nancy, you got, please.
Dr. Oh, I just wanted to say, well, unrelated. Great job. And Harvey, Mila and I read your thing to Jerry, and we got a number of really nice comments. So thank you for writing that.
You know, I couldn't have
miss you
gotten
there.
through it. I'm so glad you read it. I could not have gotten through it. I could read it and not break up, you know.
It was great.
Well, he